we have been pressured and coerced to pass drugs of questionable safety, including the RBST. I personally was very concerned that there's a very serious problem of secrecy, conspiracy, and things of that nature, and something needs to be done.
We're going to focus on some very important food safety issues because it's the #1 issue across the world. American Canadian foods are some of the most toxic foods on the planet, and this is due to the continued use of hormones, antibiotics, rendered slaughter waste, GMOs, pesticides, many of these things we've talked about before, and these foreign introductions can cause disease and death. And you know we've discussed this previously in the past, and it's a significant issue. And these are some of the primary reasons why you want to choose organic foods. Now, unlike the United States, the European Union countries, most of them do not permit these materials in food production. As they rightfully should, because their primary purpose is to protect the public health. So the issue has been lingering with the WTO for nearly 2 decades, and other food-producing countries like China, India, Brazil, Mexico are also getting into the fray. So some of these countries are actually refusing to import Canadian and American beef and GMO crops. So it's a little bit unclear to me, Dr. Chopra. Welcome, first of all. But for the items I just discussed with respect to introducing all these relatively toxic elements into our food supply, that is clearly true for America. Is it also true for the Canadian system?
The American and Canadian food now has become the most toxic, more and more toxic. And they give you solutions. The solutions that the governments are giving are ignore the existing law, Food and Drugs Act. We're not going to ban any of the things that the European Union has banned, but we will set standards for them. And those standards will become worldwide. And so you will have no choice whether you live in Europe or America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. And I've traveled to all these places in the last 2 years. And India and so on. So food must be of the same standard, which means the most toxic everywhere.
There's Shiv Chopra, who has a very prominent position with Health Canada in the past, and now is really an independent health consultant. And he has quite a bit of experience with RBGH, recombinant bovine growth hormone. And I'd like to have him share his experience with us so that he could bring us up to date more on this important component that is frequently added to milk, and also provide a historical background so we could better understand how it first came.
With Monsanto, I didn't realize how effectively a corporation could work to get something on the marketplace. The levels of coordination they had to have. They had to get university professors into the fold. They had to get experts into the fold. They had to get reporters into the fold. They had to get the public into the fold. And of course the FDA, let's not leave them out. They had to get the federal regulators convinced that this was a fine and safe product to get it onto the marketplace. And they did that. They did that very, very well.
It's a great time to be a high-producing cow. Posilac One Step, bovine somatotropin by Monsanto.
The federal government basically rubber-stamped it before they put it on the marketplace. The longest test they did for human toxicity was 90 days on 30 rats.
Posilac is the single most tested new product in history and is now available to you specifically so you can increase your profit potential.
And then either Monsanto misreported the results to the FDA, or the FDA didn't bother to look in depth at Monsanto's own studies.
The scientists within Health Canada looked very carefully at bovine growth hormone and came to very different conclusions than the Food and Drug Administration in the US did.
Monsanto's engineered growth hormone did not comply with safety requirements. It could be absorbed by the body and therefore did have implications for human health. Mysteriously, that conclusion was deleted from the final published version of their report.
They knew there were problems. They saw serious potential human health problems, and they stood up in Canada and said, we're not going to approve this because we don't believe it's safe.
I worked at Health Canada for 35 years as a senior scientific advisor.
Now, Health Canada, or portions of it, are the equivalent of US FDA for the approval of drugs, vaccines, foods, or foods containing products which end up maybe in the animals, on crops, and so on, and eventually end up in humans directly or indirectly. So that's the purpose. And we work under the Food and Drugs Act of Canada, which is virtually identical in both its history as well as application as in the United States. In Canada, we, unlike the United States, FDA, we do not actually test any product here in Canada. We take the company's word for it. Companies that want to sell any product for humans or animals which will be consumed for food by people must do research, must produce their own data and bring to the government for verification. And verification in Canada is only paper verification. We don't do any testing. The US FDA does get involved in the actual testing, clinical testing, and we receive the same data. We were supposed to receive the same data that the US FDA received, and only a paper. It was sitting under our noses, locked up. Nobody would let us see it. Of 4 scientists, and we produced that report, gaps analysis report, and we showed that the certain data that I had asked for back in 1988 had actually been produced by Monsanto. It was sitting under our noses, locked up. Nobody would let us see it, and it was also received by at the US FDA, and all the questions that I had asked were then came out to be positive, exactly my concerns.
Let me just
interject. It increased.
Can I just interject something here, just for clarification?
We were supposed to receive the same data that the US FDA received, and only a paper exercise based on that will say we want more data, or we approve it, or we don't approve it, or if we don't approve it, we put some precautions, warnings, and so on. But the pressure was not to do any of those things, not to require data, don't put any precautions, don't raise any questions, just pass it. Because now the bosses are receiving these orders by policy only, not by law, from higher up in the political circles. Anyway, the matter then exploded in Canada, and I was hauled before the Senate Committee on Agriculture with my colleagues, and we had to testify under oath. And what happened?
We have been pressured and coerced to pass drugs of questionable safety, including the RBST. I personally was very concerned that there's a very serious problem of secrecy, conspiracy, and things of that nature, and something needs to be done.
And the companies, how strong they are, the companies behind it, and what they're doing to our farmers to eradicate our natural food. Please get involved. It's a huge thing. It's our food, and it's going on.
And they bring pressure on the politicians because they make political donations and so forth, and they put a wager on every political party. And that's how they, and there are lobbyists, registered lobbyists, and then they even get jobs inside the cabinets. Like Michael Taylor at the US FDA, and there were people like that in our in Canada as well, working in the Minister of Health's office, and pressuring that where is this product, where is that product, and so it's that kind of pressure, incestuous relationship between corporations and the government, and the public just assumes, because government is looking after them, public just assumes everything is all right. If an individual scientist like me blows the whistle, and then of course everybody gangs up, and then they say he's not a team player, he's a troublemaker, and get rid of him. And I have letters all documented in my book, how the companies wrote to the Minister of Health, how they went to the Privy Council, how they went to the Prime Minister, fire Shiv Chopra and fire whoever stands with him. And that's how 3 of us were fired. So that is the kind of pressure that the companies have. You know, it's an interesting...
What we did say and what we did publish was actually corroborated, confirmed that it was not the transgene which was the problem, but it was the technology. As a scientist actively working on the field, I find that it's very, very unfair to use our fellow citizens as guinea pigs.
The day after the interview's broadcast, Árpád Pusztai was fired and the research team dismantled.
I worked for the last 40 years at the Revolt Research Institute in Aberdeen, particularly the problems affecting the gastrointestinal tract of the rats. The problems were that the genetically modified potatoes induced what we call a proliferative growth. Effects can, for example, affect the liver. And we found some secondary changes in the liver, just like as this recently published Malatesta paper, which did establish that by feeding young rats on Roundup-ready soya, you do get some proliferative, again, sort of higher metabolic ranges of effects in the liver of these animals. Again, we changed around because you're being used as the guinea pig. They are doing the experiments on you, and what is even more, you don't know whether they are doing it or not, because in the US, for example, it's not labeled. So therefore, you don't know whether you're eating GM food or not.
Foods that have been altered with foreign DNA to resist herbicides or to become a pesticide, and that they're untested, unlabeled, and that I had been unknowingly...
You're eating them. And you're eating them.
Outrageously, these GMO foods are hidden away in everyday foods.
They are made and unnaturally forced together in a lab.
Genetic engineers alter the DNA codes by splicing in other genes.
There are leftover hormones, some of them are synthetic hormones, and they have been proven to be complete carcinogens. In other words, they can initiate a new cancer or they can promote an existing cancer. They'll do both. And therefore, they're called complete carcinogens. And they are in the food supply. If something is a carcinogen, you cannot determine the safe limit for such a product, because a single molecule of such a product can attach to a single cell in the body, and if it's done on a daily basis for life, it can trigger and promote cancer. So therefore, it takes a long time to develop, and the governments are saying, well, there's no proof that it causes cancer. How are you going to get proof? Unless there are lifetime studies, and lifetime studies in animals have not been done, and they're not allowed to be done.
This is the longest, most thorough study to have been carried out on a GMO, and we have also carried out a joint study on the most used pesticide in the world, the Roundup, which is a herbicide. It belongs to the main pesticide category. We spent over a year trying to obtain transgenic corn because no GMO manufacturers were willing.
Monsanto, the FDA, they will tell you that Roundup cannot affect the human body because we don't have the same metabolic pathways that plants have. But what Stephanie has found is that the beneficial gut bacteria in our intestines actually contain those same metabolic pathways found in plants. Now, if you don't know, Roundup is a mineral chelator. It binds the minerals and allows it so that the plant can absorb those minerals, and that's how the plant dies. It blocks those pathways. So what is it doing to our gut bacteria if our gut bacteria has the same pathways?